here for 10 years, 11 years. Yeah. There is, yeah. It's been pretty good for the most part.
Hello.
Hey, Susan.
Thanks. Hi, Joanne.
Okay.
90%.
How are you?
Good.
That's
But
right.
what about LUTC? How about the planning commission?
Don't forget, you're the expert. Remember that? They're asking you to talk about your expertise. We found out, so. Do
The
you
other
need another
news-
one? I got a million.
Oh, no,
of
it's
them.
all right.
Let me puff you up.
I'm the millennial, so they want to know about,
Yeah.
where you want to live. So, Uncle is in charge.
Yeah, he was saying that's part of why he wanted to work on this one, because like
Yeah.
something about
I look
The
like a wee
future.
babe.
yeah,
You are cute.
millennial.
But you also have a perspective on what the future could be. And that's the big thing. So that's what really makes me happy.
You know what, all our bank
You know how to
accounts
use
are
a
like.
smartphone pretty well, so.
See, I'm a Gen Xer. I just want you to look at the bottom line. But I haven't had a lot of time to look at the bottom line. It's my biggest fault. Those are funny pictures.
You did it.
So does she report to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody's structure is a little bit.
Great picture.
Michael.
Yeah. Looks nice in each. That's for getting those guys for special holidays.
Definitely sits here and the director is sit over there. We can slide over and sit beside us if we need.
Hey, I had my day.
Do you like what you're doing now better?
You're here in person. Good to see you. Yes. Not just a disembodied face, a voice.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm really excited
Okay.
when I go back.
Yep.
And I get really excited when I
Can we do the national anthem first?
Pledge of Allegiance? Yes, I can. All right, I will call to order the May 19th, 2015 special city council meeting. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And Joanne Paquette, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome. So we have a study session this evening to talk about or investigate view corridors and a brief discussion about building heights and what kinds of directions we want to see in our downtown. Principally, in the conversations I had with several council members, was the idea that at a minimum we want to protect the views from the Performing Arts and Events Center and the park. And that is the primary focus of this to get us started in regard to this conversation. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael Morales, our Community Development Director. Michael.
Good evening, Mayor Farrell, Deputy Mayor Burbidge, members of council. I'm Michael Morales, Director of the Department of Community Development. And we are here this evening to discuss investigating the concept of view corridors as it relates to specific public properties in the city of Federal Way. I was directed by the mayor a little over a month ago to begin investigating and formulating a presentation for the council on the issue in response to questions that had arisen as you move closer to the construction timing of the Performing Arts and Event Center. As you know as well, you have also come on the heels of significant and strategic property acquisition in the downtown area as it relates to the town center projects, and wanting to use those properties as catalysts for the economic revitalization of that downtown area. I will say at the outset of this conversation with you that this is a presentation of information for you to consider any process that you may want to undertake moving forward, but that we are not making any recommendation to pursue view corridors in this location or others at this point in time. And you will hear as you see examples of other view corridor projects in the Northwest and around the country, that it is a very long, time-consuming, and work-intensive project. It involves a tremendous amount of interaction with the business community and the development community, and also from the standpoint of the policy planning and implementation and development process with your planning commission and your council committee process. So those things, take, as you will see, usually a couple of years to get through a process. And so our intent this evening is not to initiate a view corridor policy development, but rather to share with you some of the concerns and issues related to the development of view corridors from the examples that we have researched around the country. I'm joined this evening by Layla Willoughby Oaks, and Layla is an associate planner with the Department of Community Development. She's been here about 5 months, and she has interesting perspectives from other areas of the region that she has lived in, but I think also from the standpoint of helping to frame the discussion about what we're doing here in terms of planning for the future of our central business district and all of the different types of issues that are related to future planning and in future generations, in particular the millennial generation, who is in the, entering the professional workforce and was really driving, I think, a lot of policy planning and development as it relates to things like light rail and transit-oriented development and other quality of life and lifestyle type development that cities are pursuing to increase densities and make a more livable, workable environment for their citizens. Also joining us is Jill Morelli, who is a senior project engineer with HDR Consultants, and HDR has put together the models on the perspective viewpoint and view corridor as it relates to the Performing Arts Event Center and the Town Center Park. Just to orient you in terms of the scope of the discussion as it relates to Federal Way, you see on the screen and in front of you an overview of the downtown area and our Town Center 3 development site within downtown. And the two stars on the map represent the approximate camera angles that were used to make the determinations and estimates of height limits that we may have in a view corridor. And the cone that's there that extends out to the southeast is what a prospective view corridor could entail in terms of how far and how wide it would need to be to preserve that. And also the study area that we undertook here only takes us out to 324th Avenue. That's for a couple of reasons. One, so it could be manageable in the time frame we were working within and within the budget, but also because as you cross over 324th, you have a large expanse of developable property potentially in the future, but that currently owns a residential manufactured home park. And also you do have some built-in protections as you get into this area for the BPA power transmission towers and lines that are there. This is another view taken from the camera angle just above Town Square Park and looking out to the southeast. That is essentially the view that everybody is so proud of in this area and that we have seen as a real asset to the community. But keep in mind as we move forward in the discussions about a Federal Way View Corridor, this was an already established retrofitted or commercial district that the city stepped into and purchased property that was developed. So we're not talking about pristine public lands that had a great view of Mount Rainier. This was a movie theater at one time and a Toys R Us, and so there weren't any considerations to view at the time that the other areas around it were developed. In general, the outline of our presentation is about our scope, the policy question, in view preservation, the context of how each of the different examples were framed for our demonstration to you, and also considerations that you may have in for this kind of a policy moving forward, and then we will show you the 3D visualizations from HDR. So with that, I think I would also just like to ask that in getting through this information is probably, I think, the best way for us to show you all that we have reviewed and researched. It's not all-encompassing of view corridors, obviously, in the country or around the world. There were some examples that we were asked to investigate per our discussions with each of you last week and leading up to this evening, and some of those examples weren't exactly what we thought they were. They either had not been implemented or were not completed or were simply stated as goals in their respective comprehensive plans. So with that, again, the specific policy question for us is going to be, should we adopt view preservation regulations to Mount Rainier for specific public properties? And with that, I would like to turn it over to Layla Willoughby Oaks. Layla?
Hello, thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Burbidge, council members, and members of the public. My name is Layla Willoughby Oaks. I'm an associate planner in community development. And as Michael has outlined today, we'll be talking about view corridors and a jurisdictional scan of those, included with considerations for view corridors in the city of Federal Way. To start off my presentation, I'd like to explain what view preservation entails. In terms of thinking about view corridors, there's often two steps. The first step would be to think about a view corridor in terms of two-dimensional, so looking aerial view, and you will see that there's a flat plane established with a certain width. So that is your first step. So for example, your point A would be the PAC, and point B might be Mount Rainier. The second step in terms of looking at view preservation would be to understand what a cross-section might look like in relation to that specific area. So you would draw a cross-section with a line connecting the elevation of a reference point to a specific elevation of the view. And the next slide should show you a better understanding of measuring height in a three-dimensional view. We did several different jurisdictional scans during our research. And these are pictures of the view from the proposed PAC, looking out onto the Town Square Park and across the Commons and to the Bonneville easement over there. Here is a second picture taken from the view of the PAC as well. This is more elevated than the Town Square Park. And as you can see on your left-hand side, the Federal Way Transit Center is also close to Mount Rainier. And you can see the other development that's mostly single-story. So for your reference, I believe the Federal Way Transit Center is about 6 stories. And that is a very typical height of what you might see in more of our suburban downtown and what would be expected possibly from the market. Next, I will talk to you about some case studies we looked at. Next, I will talk to you about some of our regulations that are in place so that you understand what the lay of the land is going into your downtown. The city center zoning has different heights. The outright permitted height for the city center zoning is 70 feet, or if you think about it, it will be about 6.5 stories. We do have discretionary provisions that would allow for up to 200 feet through land use review, or equivalent to 20 stories. The Performing Arts and Events Center is located within the city center frame, the light purple, around the main core of the city center core. The park is located within the city center core. And these are heights relative to a mixed-use development, both commercial and residential. There are some incoming policies that have not been adopted yet in our comprehensive plan update for 2015. Those do include considering providing incentives or adopting regulations for view protection of scenic vistas. These will come to you shortly in our comprehensive plan update, but those are some of the proposed city center policies that are in the pipeline as we speak. Moving on to some of the case studies that we were able to look at, we did have a quick look at, as Michael had mentioned, the city of Burien. In Burien, they had some scenic policies, but in regards to signs. The policies that were in were more so general, without the regulations to implement the scenic view policies. Next, I will talk about the city of Linwood, and then after that, our neighboring to the south, Portland, Oregon. So the stage in which scenic view preservation Linwood is set is that it is in the Alderwood City Center transition area. Now this area was established in order to make it have density flow from a single family residential area to this city center core. It was a full rezone of the area, and the study went from 2008 to, I believe, present. I'm not quite sure if the regulations have been implemented yet. And the corridor has possible height restrictions, and these are centered along two main streets. So corridors throughout this presentation are found to be designating streets, as opposed to across different parcels. This also was within the city center. In the city of Portland, it's been quite historic that view corridors have been established since the 1990s. It is also a part of state requirements to have scenic view corridors. The city of Portland is a traditional downtown that is a grid development pattern, and building heights are reviewed through a design review approval process. So it's quite discretionary when applications come in for higher building heights. And to understand the city of Portland, there's also a larger market demand for higher density types of buildings. They recently finished a 2015 scenic view corridor reassessment, and that did take into a lot of considerations and public input during that process. Going on to some other jurisdictions that are not so much like Federal Way, but do have established view corridor policies are Austin, Texas, and Cincinnati, Ohio. In Cincinnati, Ohio, the process that they use is an overlay district with a more intensive permitting process called a conditional use permit. So conditions can be put on new higher buildings that come in to the downtown. The purpose of this is to protect scenic views to that reference point shown on the screen. And the street network is grid, unlike Federal Way, which is sort of a grid, but it is larger blocks, a lot larger blocks. And moving forward, the City of Federal Way does have comprehensive plan policies to break up those blocks. into more manageable pedestrian areas. Another distinguishing factor within this case study is that there was a lot of analysis on how the land might be affected for future development and also for incoming population. The city of Austin, Texas is our next case study, and their approach is also top-down through the state. It protects the Capitol building, which is the capital of Texas, and those policies were actually revisited after there was sort of a housing boom for taller buildings. More people start to move to Austin. It is a fairly interesting city that's attracting what is known as the creative class, maybe young people without children who are interested in living in downtowns near culture, museums, and different types of amenities. One of the main issues when they did create these view corridors is that a park directly beside one of the corridors became underutilized because many of the surface parking lots and the low-rise development was not able to develop in the way the rest of the city was able to develop. So a public portion of the property or a public piece of land was actually changed into being used by more homeless folks, and people of the community started to not use that public land as much. So there was a downtown commission set to look at many of these corridors. They had over 30, I believe, to reassess the cost benefit of view over economic development. Their development pattern is also grid, and they have shorter blocks than the city of Federal Way. So some of the findings after discussing some of these different view corridors include most of them have really traditional grid systems. They're old heritage downtowns, and these view corridors have gone through different iterations as cities have evolved. And just to sum up some of our findings from the established corridors include the fact that there were shorter blocks as we have seen. They extended along a public right-of-way as seen through the Capitol building in Austin, Texas. There are traditional downtowns and they're major regional cities. A lot of suburban cities that I was reviewing didn't seem to have view protection yet because there was not as much of a market demand. In Vancouver, BC, and Austin have had sort of public outcry once these corridors were revisited 20, 30 years down the line when economic development came in. And a lot of these jurisdictions have discretionary processes in place to work with developers as they come in with new ideas and new types of building typology. Summing up my portion of the presentation, Jill will follow me, are some things that we need to think about in terms of Federal Way if we were to go towards a policy like this. Looking at what is known as a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, is always a great way to think about how a policy will implement lots of different things in your city. They include implementation, so taking away property rights from an area that is slated to be higher density, and people have purchased properties thinking that they are able to develop. Also, the light rail is great in coming into Federal Way. This may hinder some of the station area planning and opportunities that the city of Federal Way does have in terms of making it more transit-oriented, pedestrian and cycling focused. The trend is throughout to build 6 stories because stick frame construction or wood construction is a lot more affordable for developers coming in. Also, we have slated to accommodate growth in our city center core and the purple area in our zoning, and a lot of our growth is dependent on Puget Sound Regional Council funding and grants for transportation and infrastructure. Another thing to think about is implementing view corridors as a piecemeal way and thinking about should we be doing it as a larger piece of long-range planning for the future for your downtown. How do you see your downtown developing? And also to attract development in the downtown, a lot of people will base information on how predictable the permitting process is in your jurisdiction. And flowing into that, are our suburban competitors easier to get applications through? Is it a more inviting environment? Is it predictable? Then I will go and build in other jurisdictions. So in my opinion, a lot of suburbs are retrofitting their downtowns, and in actual fact, the city of Federal Way will be competing against all these different suburban downtown retrofits like Bothell, Burien, Linwood, Kent. So we need to be the most attractive that we can be and think about how you as the decision makers would like to go forward. And that ends the portion of my presentation, and Jill will be following me. Thank you.
Great job, Layla. Thank you.
How do we wait? It's okay, just hit it. Okay, great, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I think it's a privilege to be here tonight. As a former 20-year public employee, it's a treat to come back and speak with the electeds and hopefully offer some clarity for you tonight. Although I always say that this is the part where the engineering meets the art. So as an engineer, hopefully I can bring the engineering component a little less and the art maybe a little bit more. Additionally, just as a random comment, happy National Public Works Week to you. Your public works are definitely highly functioning here as you're adding these components to your downtown core. So I want to give you a couple ideas here while we're talking about visualization. Visualization attempts to take our 3D tactile world and put it into a two-dimensional viewing. So as we work through these slides, we will review this plan view, but we also will take, as Layla very aptly explained, we will take slices through it so that as you look out to Mount Rainier, you will get that idea of what you might see in the future as redevelopment occurs. So in this aerial view, as you'll see on your screen, there is one indication where that camera point is. And what we did in our short 2 weeks with staff is that we estimated where would be the best viewpoint to then start to take these slices. And what we did is we looked at an elevation that's on what will be the future PAC Plaza, or sorry, it's now PAEC Plaza, and then down on the roadway just in front of it on South 316th, and then further down in elevation, if you will, into the park. And what we chose for this presentation tonight is to take that view elevation from the future PAC Plaza and give you an idea of what you might see in the future here. So as we move forward in our slides, this is our both from a picture and the artist's rendering of what that view would be. So just try to imagine yourself, the Performing Arts Center is already complete, and you're standing on the plaza area right adjacent, right in front of the stairs that currently exist as you go down to 316th. So you're looking out, you see, as you can see on the picture from your left, you see the parking plaza structure, and then over to the right, the shopping area that's further in the distance. Obviously the color should render itself well to you, recognizing a basketball court. So now let's just, for the drama portion of this slide, let's, just want to review. So we did look at camera 8 and camera 11 and camera 12 on your screen. Those were the different elevations I mentioned before. And then again, for the drama portion of this, what is the maximum building height that you potentially would see as you looked out from that from the Performing Arts Plaza area? And that particular building is about 70 feet in height from the ground elevation upon which it sits, all right? Now, as I talk about different stories, we're going to talk about how many stories a building could potentially be that's in front of you. That'll affect developer choices, potentially. That 70 feet could equate to about 5.5 commercial stories. We use, for the purpose of this discussion, 13 feet as the height of a story for commercial purposes. You might choose to use 10 feet if it was residential. But again, for our conversation, we're standing at the PAC, and a story would be about 13 feet high. So what that equates to is the 5.5 stories. Now, while we did not render a picture of this, if you were standing down in the basketball area and wanted to turn and choose to admire Mount Rainier, for you to still do that, the building would then could only approach 50 feet, which is, would be just under 4 stories then. All right. So again, this perspective is from the Plaza of the PAC, and as you can imagine, as you look out into Mount Rainier, you're at about 20 feet higher than the basketball court is. All right, so as you look out, you certainly can afford higher buildings in the distance for your view. If you're starting down lower from the basketball court, you just missed your shot, you want to feel better, you look at Mount Rainier, then that building shouldn't exceed about 50 feet. Thank you, there was at least one smile. The rest of you obviously don't miss your shots. So now I'm standing at the PAC, and I'm going to take a slice. As I'm looking at Mount Rainier, I'm going to take a slice. So as I mentioned before, that building that was in front of you is that 70-foot building that's indicated there. As you go out further, your buildings, of course, could get higher in height, again, relative to the elevation of the ground upon which it sits. So to give you an idea, that 100-foot building is approximately on the north side of 320th, all right? And then the 115-foot building and the 140-foot building is that entire area going all the way from 320th out to 323rd. So if you can imagine, there's this cone of elevation that as you look at Mount Rainier can increase, all right? And then just to give you a relative idea, if you look at the top one, it's the slide you just viewed for 70 feet, 85, and so forth. If you were down at the park elevation, that cone would now be 50 feet closest to you, all right, all the way out to 120 feet on the south side of the shopping mall, all right? And again, just to give you an idea, the 120-foot building, if you were down in the park trying to preserve that view, the 120-foot building would certainly be well under 10 commercial stories. So to give you a little bit more of a graphic view and playing a little bit more fun with this one, both of those buildings are approximately 5-story buildings. They're no longer that 70-foot one that I was showing you before. They are exactly 5 stories at 13 feet per story, and on both of those potentially developable parcels. And then that would be the impact of the 10-story building. If you slid it across the street, certainly then Mount Rainier has disappeared. And just for fun, we have a 20-story building that now exceeds the picture. So I'm hopeful that that gives you a little bit more of a visualization about what it can be. One of the important decisions that one would make on a viewpoint is where are you taking that perspective from? In your case, there is a 20-foot difference in elevation from the plaza of the new Performing Arts Center all the way down to the park, which is also one of the other ones that's mentioned in the unadopted policy. And then back to our original cross-section and the picture that represents our 5-story building.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Jill on the models?
Council, any questions for Jill? Jill, that's a great presentation. Where did you work for 20 years in the public?
I was with the City of Seattle for well over about 15. I was Public Works Director at Mill Creek and then City Engineer at Shoreline. So
Oh, that's great.
It was a treat, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. At this point, we wanted to open this up for further discussions or questions from the council related to the earlier presentations and comments by Layla and I. And as I stated early on, this is a very limited context study that we commissioned for you all, and we are certainly not in a position to be recommending action on anything that we placed here tonight, but only to give you a better understanding and point of reference on what it takes to even consider something like this, and also, what it should be a part of in the bigger picture of downtown planning. And really asking yourselves the fundamental questions about why did we get into the real estate business in the Central Business District of Federal Way, and is this sort of a policy consideration going to help or hinder the desired effect and impact that we envisioned when we purchased the properties that are now the PAEC and the park. So with that, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the very thorough packet that you've brought through. And I also want to say, Layla, once again, great job. Really appreciate it. And Jill, thank you again. Let's go with Councilmember Maloney, and then we'll go Councilmember, it's been a couple weeks since we've had a meeting. Councilmember Maloney and Councilmember Selsky. All right.
Thank you.
I need name tags.
How quickly we forget.
Exactly. Go ahead.
Actually, I do have questions for Layla, but a quick question for Jill that occurred to me when you said what you've done in the past. Did you ever come across having to introduce view corridors in any of the jurisdictions you worked in before where there was already established properties?
Yes, yeah.
Thanks, Jill.
Yes, I did. And in all cases, we were able to do a preliminary presentation like this, but so much of this is driven by what's happening in adjacent areas. I dealt with it twice, with the infill community, with a redeveloping community, and then also a newer community. And in both cases, there wasn't even any interest to go higher than what would potentially block the views.
Okay.
So council chose differently in both cases.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Selsky.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't mind going back and forth, but I had a number of questions
Let's
for
go ahead,
Layla, if
since-
that's okay.
since you've got the
Okay.
floor, please.
Thank you, thanks. So I have a lot of questions, and it's going to sound like I'm jumping around probably. Let's see. You mentioned that you had studied a couple of other places, and you showed us some examples. But I wanted to know, and that was actually one of my questions before you told us that. So other than the one, I think it was the only Washington State example you gave us was Linwood.
That's correct.
What about areas like, I did some research before the meeting on other Washington State cities that had, I don't know if they had view corridors specifically, but they had, the height restrictions and everything like Redmond and other areas like that. Have we looked at any of those to see if they started out with already established properties that because it's essentially the same thing, whether for different reasons, but I'm wondering if you looked into any of those to see what any kind of issues or challenges may have come up.
We did look at, in terms of, in a number of communities, we saw where they were boiled back down to goals versus hard and fast policies that left them still that discretion and latitude for emerging opportunities. I mean, you need to have an opportunity for that. But one community in particular that's I call it East Side community in King County was Sammamish. And Sammamish was interested in establishing corridors for not only river corridor, but also to the mountains. But again, in Sammamish, it was based upon undeveloped land, public lands that were there in order to preserve that and have that corridor on either side be protected from those views. And there were a number of them throughout the city, but they weren't in a built-out environment like we're dealing with here in Federal Way.
Okay, thank you. And another question that I have is, you mentioned the discretionary aspect of this. Who determines, and what are do we have standards already set for who determines and what the basis is? Do we have a policy for that, basically, is what I'm asking?
Typically, when you leave it to the discretion, it's with the Director of Community Development as the CEPA responsible official, and obviously in close consultation with my building official in the mayor's office and our professional staff. And so what that means is that we can request information that we wouldn't ordinarily request in let's say a strip center type development where it's single story. Obviously there's a market for people looking into move into those kind of opportunities. But where if you're going to come in and propose a 10-story mixed-use building and you're going to have 4 floors of housing and maybe a couple of office and then some ground floor retail, we have the ability and the right to request that, where's the market study on this? How can we look at this and ensure that what you're proposing to build here can be absorbed in an amount of time that is not going to be of a detriment to everything else around it, that the financing is secured in place so that we don't end up with half-built buildings where something falls through, which has happened in some communities. And So those are all things that are at my discretion to request and consideration of something and determine whether or not it is viable and a fit for what we propose to have downtown. I prefer to have a little more specific policy that outlines the discretion that I have. But right now, those are the types of things I'd be looking at if we were to have that kind of a development, and it wouldn't be just reviewed by me or my staff. We would hire a third-party reviewer so that we have somebody who's an economist or who can compare the apples to apples and has the same credentials as a consultant to put this together, make their peer review, and give us a determination of what the likelihood of success in this project is and how far that would be out to achieve that.
Thank you. So in respect to the height being higher than whatever we determined, though, because the discretion, as I understood it, was, let's say we go up to 6 stories, but we have which is what, 70 feet or something like that. But someone has discretion to go up to determine whether a developer can go up to 120 feet or something like that. So is that also you who determines that, not
Yes.
just viability? Okay, and so do we have things built in that say, if this then that, in terms of what would cause us to go above the established heights that we set in place?
What would cause you to, cause me to strongly recommend and encourage approval or something like that would be a hard and fast bird in hand opportunity where I've got a reputable developer with viable financing in place that we're able to verify, who has done the market study work that has been analyzed and shown to be true, and primarily that is going to come with a named tenant and end user of that building who's going to occupy the amount of square space it takes to make it pencil out up front, and who's going to have the number of jobs created that's going to create the need for additional housing downtown, and it can help with that retail and commercial development. And so from that point, I'd say that's a pretty darn good project, and it's a good place to be. In all likelihood today, as the rules sit, you couldn't propose something like that without resolving a parking issue. Mm-hmm. The parking requirements alone right now are what's going to keep the world flat, so to speak, because if you're going to go vertical, your density is rising. Where are these people going to park when they're living there? So that in and of itself right now for us is a bit of a, I won't say a backstop, but I know when we think about going anything above, it's going to be 5-6 stories. That parking element has got to be addressed in some sort of a collaborative fashion with the city and other private property owners, and that's a big cost driver right there, unless you were to make it parking exempt because it's such a great opportunity.
Right, and I agree with you. And actually, you kind of are still going around what my question really is, though, and it kind of goes to what Layla said about piecemealing things and attractiveness. We've been saying for a while that we need to look at a vision for the downtown that's inclusive of not just the view corridor, but building heights in general. But we need to probably get to our community to find out how high do they want our buildings to be. And so you're talking about economic development things, which I think are incredibly important. But there's another aspect to this, which is livability, aesthetics, the type of community that people want to live in. And so do you have that kind of discretion where you can say, if we've heard from the community that they only want a certain amount of building, a certain height, that you can say, well, it's economic development, so it's going higher?
The public comment part of that process, as it relates to the SEPA process, can be considered, but fundamentally, I would say to you that that's not going to be a primary consideration. You want a view, you buy a view, and if you have a problem with building heights, then you can deal with that within your own neighborhood. But to say I don't want 20 stories in the downtown, but I don't live there, I don't work there, I don't own property there, I'm really, that kind of a comment to me, unless they can show some great detriment to the environment, or that a traffic situation or infrastructure situation is not mitigated, it's not going to carry you at the end of the day. And I can't say that that's going to be a really, an argument that we're going to take really seriously just because they don't want Federal Way to go vertical. That's what I'm hearing. And so if you were to get into some sort of a downtown planning effort that talked about what kind of a design do we want to see in our downtown, what do we want buildings to reflect in terms of the city's image and its brand,
right,
and that complements what we're investing in plus what others may invest in, that's a fair discussion. And if they get into, that gets into discussions of height, it's a good time to have the discussion, because as developers are planning on some of these large parcels in the downtown, they can be mindful of that. Most developers that we work with, they want to know what the city wants. They want to know what's important here. And if we talk about, if there's a way that we can preserve something here in your development, let's try to put it to paper and see what works, and if it still makes their project work. But
So in your mind, it would be a good exercise to get the community together and get their input, so that as we attract development, they will keep that in mind.
not exactly.
Okay.
I would say that when it comes to downtown planning, you need to cover the base first, and the base is going to be your business and property owners, and primarily property owners. What's their vision? What do they, what are their opportunities that they see, and how can the city help facilitate that if it meets what the market is asking for? And that's where the community input comes in, is when you're talking about what does the local market want. Because you can talk about boutiques and all kinds of fancy stuff when you're downtown, but it's on a rainy Tuesday night in January that it's the locals who are there at that business and are keeping it alive, and not a whole lot of other things. And so that's where the community input comes into play in a downtown, about what makes it attractive to you, what makes you want to spend more time here and spend more money here and bring people here. But and part of what would you like it to look like when you're talking about the landscape. But going up or down in vertical, I just, unless we were a waterfront community where our downtown was coming down to the water, like a Port Townsend or something like that, and we want to say these Victorian buildings must remain how they are and that view must not be obstructed, that's fair game. In this situation, I wouldn't agree that that's the case.
Okay, thank you, and I'm done, but just one last quick thing. Is that your opinion, or is that standard? Is that the way it is?
That's my professional opinion,
Okay.
based upon the experience of going through the process.
Okay.
But all politics is local, and every community does have different dynamics that come into play.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Councilmember
Thanks,
Selsky.
Mayor Farrell. Lots of good questions
Yeah,
there.
great questions.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, really good.
So one of the things that I look at when I look at the shadow of this view corridor, it goes right over Paldo World, right off of 320th. And an investor came and bought that, I think within the last year, for several $1 million.
11.
$11 million. It's a good-sized parcel, right in the shadow of the view corridor from the PAEC. So with regard to that, they must have had some plans, I would assume. We may or may not know what those plans are yet. But would they be grandfathered in any particular plan? And I think, Leila, you referred to it as the outright permitted classification, I think the 6-story level. Would they be grandfathered in anything like that, or would that be up to us still to determine that, even though they purchase this property under a set of circumstances?
So from the current planning process, just to break it down so you know how things go through, they are not grandfathered unless they have a complete application. In a lot of instances, a pre-application will come in and they will work with staff to understand the regulations and the requirements and even public perception of different types of developments, especially substantial, in a pre-application process. Mm-hmm. Then they will start doing their conceptual plan, and then they would submit probably what is known as a Process 3 application.
Right.
And then until we determine within 28 days that the application is complete and complete for every single department that does review the application, you are not grandfathered into those to that height. There are other regulations such as the downtown or the city center court community design guidelines that do play into effect when looking at design of buildings and appropriateness and scale. So to answer you today, they're not they are not grandfathered into any of the current zoning regulations.
Okay. And you may not know the answer to this, but maybe somebody does. Do we know what their intent is? Has anybody talked with Paldo
yeah.
World? Okay.
Yeah.
Or the owners of that property, is
Right.
who
We
I
have.
mean. Okay.
I have,
Okay.
along with our chief of staff. Brian, can you characterize, how would you, I do remember at one point we did, when there was an investor group coming in, we actually talked about this view corridor. I remember having that conversation because they were thinking about multiple buildings on that site. And we actually had this conversation about making sure that if you were going to build something that was going to be, you know, that you really wanted to make sure you didn't block the view from the park and the pack with regard to the mountain. And you know, I said that would likely not put you in very good stead. You know, the community would not be all that happy. But I think they are looking at some sort of mixed use. Brian, can you talk about what they're thinking about?
Mayor, as you pointed out, they have had discussions about a project there to do it, but they're also dealing with property and long-term leases on several of the major pieces in that complex, specifically Desiree Industries. So that restricts them to some extent. In this point, you'd have to have some alternative and some means by which to address the lease that's currently there. In our conversations with them, we have talked about the view corridor. We've talked about the preservation idea of the importance of keeping, you know, the Mount Rainier view from where the Performing Arts and Conference Center is. They have produced some preliminary sketch drawings that you know, are of different heights and different uses, but I would characterize it as very preliminary, and again, any type of market analysis, as was referred to by our community development director, would need to occur to determine if that's sustainable or not. The other piece is that you know, Sound Transit and some of their options for where a station would be located are right in this same property area, and that adds another level of ambiguity in terms of next steps. But we are in ongoing dialogue with this company and with this developer, and we'll continue to have conversations with them.
Okay, it sounds like a good partnership. And then just a couple more quick things. So we really do want to find that sweet spot, I think, between economic development and protecting this view from this public land so that we have the best use of it. So again, this shadow that we've seen in your drawing there, we could theoretically limit the heights of the buildings to protect the view all the way from the floor of the town square park in that shadow, but have other building heights and restrictions in the non-corridor, right? We could theoretically have a 10-story building as long as it's not within that view corridor. Theoretically.
Yes, that's correct, and that's why when you saw in some of the examples, it's easier to do when you have an established grid with, you know, wide boulevards that preserve that, and you can see that in Austin, Washington D.C., and many other places that adds to, you know, its flexibility.
Exactly, and thank you for those sketches or illustrations that you had. I think that brought that out very clearly. So great, thank you. That's it.
Councilmember Honda.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, and you did great, Leila. So I'm grateful that we're having this conversation, but I have some concerns. And one is, if a developer were to come in and to do a market study to see if they could build a 20-story building, would they be required to share that market study with the city to see if
As part of the planning and review process, that's within my discretion to request it, yes.
okay.
And I would tell you for that size of a project, I certainly would be, and I'd want to have it peer reviewed.
So for me, this discussion isn't just about height limits or the view. It's about a bigger picture. It's about our vision and our planning for downtown. And downtown is more than just the 21, 22 acres that we're talking about right now. It's a much bigger area. And what I would like to see as we go forward is some kind of a public discussion on what our citizens and our business owners would like to see in our downtown area, what kind of design standards they'd like, what their vision is, because we haven't actually asked our citizens what it is that they'd like to see downtown. And this, you know, we have a chance to redevelop a downtown area, and very few cities get to do that. You know, it's really a great opportunity for us. But we need to, I believe that we need to reach out to the public, and I'd like to see us do that. I do believe we need to ask our downtown businesses, especially our business owners, you know, what they want, property owners, what they want to see. And I'm also concerned that as we wait for the Sound Transit Board to make the decision on where the alignment is going, and then once that decision is made, then we have to wait for the voters to say yes, they approve the money for that light rail to come to Federal Way. And so there's, you know, some steps that we're going to be waiting on for a while. But in the meantime, we could be talking and making a plan and getting a vision together. So thank you very much.
Well, let me just ask, Brian, don't we have a strategic plan, right? I mean, you know, the plan for our downtown that has been the product of public input?
There's been a lot of public. There's been a great deal of public input on specific areas. You know, whether we're talking about the core or talking about the frame, talking about heights or types of buildings, but an all-encompassing discussion of design standards. You know, that is something that has not been that I can recall a comprehensive discussion about what are the standards, what are the things that we'd like to see in terms of types of construction, types of look, but
not that kind of discussion, but in regard to building heights and what's allowed, what's not allowed.
Well, in terms of building heights, yes. I mean, in terms of the core and the frame, I think that's part of our comprehensive plan that's been in place for many years, and I think and has been addressed specifically with the core and specific properties and what discretion is available in terms of if heights were to be increased above the 200 feet, what are the criteria that would need to occur in terms of parking, amenities, those types of things for that to be considered. There are, you know, the economies of scale oftentimes for developers makes the difference as to whether, you know, you have 2 additional stories or something else. That market analysis, which our community director made reference to, are very important calculations that need to take place. But there have been discussions many times over the years, but in terms of the design standard piece, which I think I heard from Councilmember Honda, we have not had that type of construction and type of look. Probably the best example of that would be something like Leavenworth, you know, who established, we want to look like a mountain community, so every construction project that's there has a certain design that takes place.
Issaquah is going to feel like that, and you'll see that happen in the Southwest United States as well, as far as that art, you know, that stucco kind of feel. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mr.
Councilmember Acevedo, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for Michael, and that's certainly, it's good to sit up here and listen to my colleagues on their concerns and thoughts and ideas. I've gone through a few planning commission meetings, and I'm fully aware that right now is the time that, as everybody is, that now's the time they're going over the comprehensive plan. What have you done to do an extensive amount of outreach for public solicitation? Because obviously that's one of the requirements, if I'm not mistaken.
In terms of the comp plan?
Yes, and I guess a follow-up to that is I imagine that in the comprehensive plan, this would be part of the conversation.
So in the comprehensive plan, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, the language does refer to trying to preserve corridors through incentives and other provisions. I'm trying to get back to that for you. Was it that far back? Okay, here we go. These are proposed policies. So adopting strategies to protect views such as Mount Rainier, especially for civic uses in public parks. So this is a general goal. What are going to be the strategies to get there? And are hard and fast view corridors a strategy? That's a debate that still needs to be had if you want to have it. to consider protecting views from civic buildings and uses, such as the PAC is also in there, providing incentives or adopt regulations for view protection of scenic vistas. Now that can go, in a lot of different directions. So the framework is there, and that's really the basis where you have to start this kind of a conversation, is the general policy basis and the goals in that document. And from there, what would follow is, as part of any work plan, would be, are we going to undertake this and get from 30,000 feet to 10,000 feet, and now to start talking about pedestrian traffic flow, vehicle traffic flow, how it relates to design standards, and even potential placement of buildings that we can recommend to developers to help preserve that. It's a much more conducive process to be able to sit down with the property owners in this case, and especially if we give some thought to it and have them involved in that process, where you look at a large parcel and say, what are the possibilities of how you can place buildings and frame this, without us having to do it as big government, just saying nothing's going to go in this line and in this corridor, without getting that kind of input from the developer. But again, it costs, the thing about public comment and participation in something like a comprehensive plan is it's free for the citizen. For a developer, and we want to know how would we, scheme this out and what's the best placement for properties. He may have to do some more work and spend some money to do that. And we hope we have somebody who's willing to do that, but we can only ask so much. And so that's why that kind of process, you not just have to be able to have the time to do it, but you need to resource it properly so that you can hire whatever kind of consultants you need, so we can work hand in hand with developer to kind of cut both of our costs down for some more of that kind of master planning effort. And I think it's really going to be about, and I said this at the beginning, and I would love to hear some of her thoughts on what those kind of amenities would be and what the kind of features would be, this is not about today. It cannot be about today, and it really can't even be about 10 years from now if you're talking about 10, 20-story buildings. You really need to think about when Layla is my age, or Councilmember Selski's age, and what's going to happen in that amount of time, what's going to follow from that, because that's what's driving a lot of decision making in urban areas for planning and development. And while we mentioned earlier that there's still a number of steps that we'll be waiting on in terms of sound transit, I would tell you, in my opinion, as I see that moving forward, that once that decision is made by Sound Transit, that this is the alignment we are going to propose, and this is the station location in Federal Way that we are going to propose, and it's made by that board, you're going to see a first buzz and a little bit of activity and some jockeying going on among the development community. How do I benefit from taking me out? How do I benefit from getting something adjacent to this? What now opens up as a possibility for my development? And what are, by the time I get it built 10, 15 years from now, what generation is going to be my consumer, and what do they want to live in, and what do they want to work and spend their money in? That's going to be your first wave right there. Once the voters pass it, they need to be ready to go. At that point, they're going to want to have themselves situated and positioned correctly. You're not going to start buying property after the ballot passes, because then it's going to be too late and it will be bought up. So we're not too far away from having to make those kind of decisions and having those kind of conversations.
Okay, Councilmember Sapadasa. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. I just want to clearly understand this conversation. So my question is about your discretionary response if a developer comes tomorrow and asks you all these questions, and if they meet the market study and if all the criteria is met. What would that look like, especially currently when we have the proposed goals and proposed policies? In other words, the proposed goals and policies are going to sometime become policies and goals, correct?
These, when the comprehensive plan comes to the city council following tomorrow night's planning commission and the next two LUTC committee meetings, and that is adopted, that will become what's in place. And you can read, these are about goals and things we will try to do to protect these views, but they're not hard and fast regulations. So it still will look like a SEPA process. There'll be public comment, there'll be a level 3 review. I request information that I need to analyze and make a decision along with the staff on permitting the project. I would tell you, in that kind of a situation, my role is facilitating that development for success, getting it through the process successfully and smoothly, and getting community input in that process, and then helping that project, if approved, to get to permitting and the construction as expeditiously as possible and with the least amount of hurdles, and with knowing what the rules are going to be right up front and getting it done, because we're talking about a lot of money here.
Right. So there's still room for you to make those determinations?
Yeah, and that's what's built in there.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it can't be added to, that more specifics can't be added. I prefer a little more specificity, but I would caution against taking hard and fast positions on rules, because then you take away opportunities that you'll never get to see by having that in there.
Okay, thank you.
You're
That
welcome.
was my question.
Okay, great. We've heard several questions from the council members, but we've got some folks in the audience. Are there any questions from the audience? And we've actually got a business owner who happens to be Mr. Cho. Did you want to let the council know anything in regard to, Mr. Cho owns the McDonald's right in the, not to put you on the spot, sir, but we've got a business owner right here in our council, is with his council, the other kind of council. Did you want to let us know what your thoughts are in this, or?
Well, you know, I do find it interesting.
Do you want to come up to the microphone, please? It's great that you're here, because your business is right, and you're actually one of the largest employers here in Federal Way, are you not?
Yes, exactly.
450 employees overall?
That's correct. About 430. So,
430.
yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, what do
yeah.
you think, sir?
Well, yeah, you know, and thank you again, Mr. Mayor, council members. You know, I found it interesting, the presentation with that view corridor and shadow, and then the proposed, our proposed configuration that for the Sound
rail.
Transit
Right.
light rail facility, because it looks to me like that span that where we want our rail facility would actually be right in that view corridor.
Yes.
Is that?
It would be,
Ironically,
Yeah.
yeah.
but the height down there is not going to be in a place too obstructive.
Oh, it would not. So I thought it was going to be elevated, though. No. So.
Michael, can you say that out loud and on the microphone?
Excuse me. Thank you for that question. It's actually very good. We haven't talked a whole lot about the Sound Transit station. As we looked at this corridor, we anticipate, even with the elevated rail, because we have that 20-foot plus drop in elevation down to 320th Avenue, that even from the kinds of elevated platforms and rails that I've seen in other cities in the country, you know, you're talking about 40, 50 feet above the air. And so that's still well within what we would be talking about. And even if you go another 20 above that, it's still well within that area.
Okay. All right. Mr. Cho, anything?
Yeah, no. I mean, because again, the potential for that station and the benefit that would provide both to the development just to the east as well as on the other side with the commons looks like it would be a big boon for the city of Federal Way, and obviously would keep me whole too on that one side. So I'm definitely for that proposal, and I'm glad that the view is protected, so that it sounds like it all falls into place.
Very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, sure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, sir. Good to meet you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to address the council on this particular issue? Yes, sir. Jim, can you come on up? Thank you.
Question on perspective.
Maybe.
I like perspective. A question on perspective of the view corridor, and they're talking about the view from the PAC, but it looks like the pictures that their photographs are showing are from the other end of the property, and if I understand, the PAC would be west of there.
It's a good question. I think it's got it a little bit, I just kind of orient myself, I think it's a little bit east of that corner, but more about where the front door would be. I think if you looked at the camera angles on one of the slides. In fact, actually, Michael, it's a great question about perspective, because Jim, when I saw those angles, I thought the same thing. I thought it appears like it's over a little bit more east as opposed to what that would look like. So can we see the camera angle?
Yeah, let's try to
or the
find
locations? It's deeper in the presentation.
Yeah. Bear with me on the slide, it's flashing. So it's at a point where if you look at the early plans of the Performing Arts Center, it's in more of that plaza area. The Performing Arts Center itself is oriented towards the southwest corner. I know that they're adjusting that a little bit. So it is at that point where you would probably more likely than not enjoy the view from that piece of property. We did look at a number of different locations along 316th, where would be the more probable one, and eventually you have to pick one, right?
No,
Jill,
exactly.
Jill, can you please, actually, you've got a camera position slide.
I do. I know I do. There we go. Okay, so
There it
what
is.
we're looking at is what we're calling Cam 8. So
Yeah.
it's the blue camera number 8. We looked at you could guess, we looked at in excess of 12 different locations to try and get a guess. There's a preliminary picture you can come up with rather inexpensively and quickly and we worked with staff to figure out, okay, what's the best. Crossed it over, overlaid it with the Performing Arts Center. So, and you would take, if you get deeper into this, Mr. Morales certainly will guide you towards that, but if you get deeper into this, you're gonna wanna look at some different locations or angles and the impacts on those. So.
Okay, great. Council, I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
I just had one other question, and this is just a skeptical observation. In the city of Los Angeles, they have severe height restrictions because of the earthquake situation. That's where I grew up, and one of the things that some clever people in the city came up with is the concept of offsets. Now, offsets where, okay, if you agree to not build your building to X height, you can actually sell the difference between the height you could have built it to the height you actually built it to, and sell that difference to a developer to be able to increase his height or her height above the height of the building, above the normally restricted limit. And that kind of really, I almost hesitated to bring up the idea of this offset because it gets into a real creepy control issue that I really hope that the council does not remember now that I brought it up to you.
All right, erase. All right.
Exactly.
As my 7-year-old likes to say. All right, Council, any other questions about this? Deputy Mayor Burbidge.
Thank you. Thank you for all the presentations. They're very illuminating and have given us a lot of food for thought. But I have one specific question, and that is in terms of the differential in height of the land at different positions. Do we have data, say, on the differential land heights all the way from 324th up to the park, through the park?
The answer is yes, approximate based upon the GPS data that we were using. So, aside from just the 20-foot drop approximately that we know goes down with the park, that is why on this slide, HDR was able to project the different elevations on building heights that you could have moving forward. So if you look up there, this cross-section basically takes those calculations into place. So 140-foot building here to the far right, remember, this is if you're looking sort of to the east to the mountain and you're not standing at the pack. So if standing at the pack, you could still see the mountain with a 140-foot
Right.
building out at South 24th Avenue. And remember, as we said earlier, we aren't quite sure how far the easements on either side of the BPA transmission towers is and what those restrictions will be to building around that. That certainly is something to contend with in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council, anything else? Very productive meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, staff. Really appreciate it. Layla, Michael, Jill, great job. Thank you very much. And Isaac, thanks for being present and ready to assist. Okay, guys, this special meeting is adjourned. We start our city council meeting in about 17 minutes.
Thank you.
I was going to say, they have like